Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. All right. I'm Larry Light. I serve on the MWA Board of Directors. I'm also the treasurer, which means I handle the money, which means that I'll be looking at everybody's expenses. So I've written several novels and some short stories in Hitchcock and Queen. So on to our panelists. We have with us today Robert Jackson Bennett, a 2025 Best Novel nominee for the Tainted Cup, part one of a new series. Robert has won many awards, including an Edgar for Best Paperback Original. He lives in Austin, Texas. Next is Leigh Constantine, Best Short Story nominee for Everywhere You Look, an Amazon original. She and her sister are the international best-selling authors of the Mrs. Parrish books. Then we have Bonnie Kistler, a Best Paperback Original nominee for Shell Games. She is a former trial lawyer and has homes in Florida and North Carolina. Ashley Lawson is a Best Critical Bio nominee for On Edge, Gender and Genre in the works of Shirley Jackson, Patricia Highsmith, and Leigh Brackett. She is an English professor at West Virginia Wesleyan College. Joanna Schaffhausen is the 2025 Sue Grafton nominee for All the Way Gone, which is fourth in a series. She has a PhD in psychology and lives near Boston. Amy Tintera is a... Amy Tintera is a Best Novel nominee for Listen for the Lie. She has written several YA books before starting to write for adults. She lives in LA. So the way we'll handle this is I'm just going to lob out a question. We'll just probably go down the row. We'll keep it very informal. I hope, and I want you guys to hold me to this, to give 10 minutes for questions. Somehow that never seems to quite happen, does it? But we'll give it a shot this time. Okay, the first panel question, on your marks, and we'll start with Robert. Tell us about the one character from your nominated book, whether it's the protagonist or not. One character.
Sure, probably the one to talk about is Anna, who is our detective in the Tainted Cup. That's what everyone is up front saying that's who I'm reading the book for. If you look at all the Goodreads quotes, like 70% of them are her. She is someone, when I wrote her, I was thinking a lot about all the Nero Wolfe books because it felt like cheating. And the idea that there is this genius who lives in an apartment and won't leave and is very strange and is very rude, and he sends out someone to learn about the case, to learn about the crimes, and they have to come back and report then, and then he solves it right there. It just felt like cheating to me. It felt like a great setup that you could get a lot of juice out of. And so I started thinking about that in a fantasy world, and I realized that it aligned with a trope that works really well, which is the witch and the witch's apprentice. You know, she lives in her strange hut, never goes out, she's a hermit, and they have to send someone out there to do all the witchy stuff out in the world. And so that worked quite well. And the more that I thought about her, the more fun it is. Her character is someone who's both kind of insane and brilliant. She lives with a blindfold on because she doesn't want to get too distracted with the world. She finds too many things in the world too interesting. But she's also very foul-mouthed. She's filthy. She eats raw meat a lot. She's extremely gross. She sexually harasses her assistant a lot and asks a lot of questions that are very impertinent. But it's really fun because she can go from being Shakespearean in one moment and talk at length about the nature of man, and then I can do a pivot and have her make a joke and have that work well. There's a part in the second book where her assistant has to leave for 2 weeks, and she said, well, you need to bring me a lot of chamber pots because last time I tried to take care of mine while blindfolded, and I dumped it all over this one lady's pet bird. And it's really nice that I can just have her stop being smart, stop being the genius, and just say something like that. And I'm like, great, yeah, they'll take that. That flies. So that's probably the one.
Okay.
Well, my protagonist uses the toilet, so that's not. Her name is Jade, in Everywhere You Look, and she is young 20s woman who is still reeling 10 years later from the death of her father that she feels responsible for. She's in a very toxic relationship with a 3-time divorced older man in his 40s. She knows it's not the right thing, but she says it's one thing to know what your bad habits are and another thing to get rid of them. And so it's not a spoiler to say that, Jade she goes every year to New York, once a year on her birthday, to have a dinner in remembrance of what she and her father used to do. And she's sitting here on the night that she's planning to take her life. When she looks out, there's lights from an ambulance that all of a sudden bathe the sidewalk in light, and she sees her father alive. So that begins a quest to find out what happened, why she thinks he died all of those years ago, why he's remained hidden, and how it has upended her life, and sort of makes her look at all her choices, and the mystery goes from there.
My favorite character from my novel, Shell Games, would be the victim, who fortunately doesn't die until about halfway through, so we do get to know her a bit. With any character, we strive to make them three-dimensional, and I think one way to do that is to have contradictory elements in their character. If you remember if I could paraphrase Walt Whitman, do I contradict myself? Yes, I am large, I contain multitudes. I think a character who contains multitudes is an interesting one. Kate Sawyer contains multitudes. She is a self-made, multimillionaire real estate developer in coastal Florida. She is 70 years old, glamorous, beautiful. She's a power broker in Florida politics. She's a Wall Street Republican who hates the MAGA Republicans. And her contradictory trait is that she is a soft-hearted romantic. She is dead-eyed, steely in negotiations in business. She will cut your throat. But when she is reunited with her long-lost high school sweetheart, she is just mush. And she falls in love with him all over again. At the very beginning of the novel, they marry in a glamorous wedding. On their wedding night, Kate calls the police in hysterics, claiming that her brand new husband, her long-lost sweetheart, Charlie, has just confessed to her that he was the Tylenol murderer. Show of hands, who remembers the Tylenol murders? And the setup then is that Charlie denies that he said such a thing, says she was drunk on wedding champagne, she hallucinated the whole thing, and the FBI very quickly established that Charlie was a Marine deployed overseas at the time of the Tylenol murders and could not have done it. So the question becomes, did he in fact confess this to her, a crime he could not have committed, as a way of gaslighting her, as a way of proving to people that she's losing her mind and thus get control of her fortune by having her declared, incompetent? Or is she really losing her mind? Does she really hallucinate it? And the protagonist of the book is her daughter, who has to figure out where the truth lies between these two extremes. And Kate is just a fascinating character to me. I like older women characters, and for whatever reason. and I think that her death resounds, largely in the community and throughout the book.
Well, I feel a little weird answering this question because I obviously did not write the characters that I talked about, and I don't know if I can consider Shirley Jackson and Patricia Highsmith characters, though we probably could. But the thing that motivates me as a scholar is advocating for the work of forgotten or misunderstood women writers, so I feel like I can do that today very nicely. But there are a lot of characters you probably can expect me to want to talk about. Eleanor from The Haunting of Hill House, Ripley from all the Ripley books, but I'm going to go for the lesser known author in the lesser known works. Leigh Brackett in 1957 published 2 books. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but she published 2 domestic suspense novels, and it was really different from anything that she'd written before. One was An Eye for an Eye, and the other was The Tiger Among Us. And the main characters of both of those books are middle-class professional men who have had their worlds upended by a particular crime, and they spend a lot of the novel just sort of wandering around helplessly, which doesn't sound like it would be riveting fiction, but it is. And they learn a lot about the worlds around them, and particularly other neighborhoods, other groups of people, by trying to figure out this crime that literally hits close to home. And I think it's really kind of amazing how she's able to maintain the suspense and to resolve the plot without having heroic heroes at the center of it. And I see a lot of commonalities between the book, and they're both out of print. So if anyone has connections, I would like to make that happen.
So my book, All the Way Gone, centers on the question of whether you can be a good sociopath, because we have a lot of sociopaths, unfortunately, wandering around, and you would sort of hope, like, okay, why do we have so many? Maybe they are useful. And one of the professions that they could potentially be useful for is surgery. So the possible villain at the center of my book is a Chicago neurosurgeon named Craig Canning. And a local professor has written a soon-to-be-released book about him called The Good Sociopath. Only just a few weeks before the book comes out, a young woman falls to her death from a balcony in Craig's apartment building, and the author is a little concerned that maybe he's not such a good sociopath after all. So she hires my protagonist, Annalisa Vega, to look into Craig Canning, and the bulk of the book is kind of a cat and mouse, so she's trying to figure out, is he a good sociopath or is he not? And that sort of sleight of hand, and then the question of whether you can actually be a good sociopath was really compelling and interesting to me with my background in psychology as something to write. So Craig was a lot of fun.
So my book, Listen for the Lie, is about a woman who is widely believed to have murdered her best friend, but she has lost her memory of the night, so she doesn't remember. And 5 years later, a podcaster decides to take up the case, and she is forced to return to her hometown to help him solve it. And the reason she is forced to return to her hometown is basically because her grandmother is the one who reaches out and says, "Come to my birthday party." And so that is who I want to talk about, is Grandma, because she is everyone's favorite character in the book. She's my favorite character. And she is a hilarious 80-year-old woman living in a tiny house, drinking before noon. She has an attitude, she's a badass. And my goal with Grandma was to portray an older woman in a really sort of complex, interesting light, because sometimes we can see older women portrayed just as mothers, just as grandmothers, or sort of background characters to even when we're writing about a 20-year-old woman, she's the focus. And so I really wanted to bring a lot of attention to Grandma and sort of write a woman who I would like to be in the future, sort of, maybe with less drinking. Grandma drinks a lot in the book, but maybe the sort of 80-year-old that I want to be is the cool grandma in the flowing dresses living in the tiny house.
Okay. Second question. What are the elements of an engaging character generally? In other words, what are the ingredients that go into a good major character? Sure.
I think that there's two kinds of characters that folks like to read about a lot. And there's one is like the good hang, where it's like, yes, I'd like to hang out with this person and spend time with them. I might even want to be this person for a little bit. That's like the Marlowes of the world, where they have this cool vibe, like an ambiance to them, that you sort of want to drift in for a moment, to sort of feel like how they move through the world. That's really good for protagonists. There's a second type which is fun to hear about, and this is the thing that happens in real life. There's lots of people at my wife's office. I don't want to spend time with these people, but I am like, hey, so what did Craig do today? And then she'll rattle off all this stuff. I'm like, man, it's messed up again. That's classic Craig. Craig's not real. But that is a very different kind of thing. It's sort of almost a puzzle where you can't quite comprehend why this person is doing the things that they're doing. As well as each thing that they do, no matter how small, feels like it can be traced back to that puzzle, to that like a contradiction as to who they are and why they are doing these things that they do. I kind of like to think that Den, who is the protagonist of my story, is sort of more the good hang sort of a guy. He's very quiet, reserved, but he's also sharp. He's very observant. He's cool under pressure. He's very, he's almost like a butler. He's very, but although he does have a sword and like weapons, he is, one of those types of butlers. We all know them. Quite stiff upper-lipped. But then with Anna, that's something you want to hear about. You don't want to spend time with Anna. She's frankly, probably pretty awful to be around. Den is paid to be around her. He doesn't have a choice. She is his commanding officer. I definitely think that trying to comprehend what the difference is there about trying to make sure that this is someone that is a delight to hear about or a person that you'd like to be can really help build a path towards making someone quite engaging that they want to read on the page.
Most of what I write is psychological suspense, and so when I'm drawing characters, what I hope for in a protagonist, it doesn't, usually the protagonist is likable, however, not perfect. So I want to draw a character that has real flaws and real, is influenced by real trauma and a past, and is fully, three-dimensional. And that's often, they sometimes come fully formed, but there are times when I don't feel I know that character, and I have to go back and do a lot of rewriting or really think about, it's not just for me as simple as saying, well, this is where she went to school, or this is what happened, this is what her background was. So I really like to feel, it's like a friend, as the pages develop, you get to know them more and more, and they have secrets, and they have foibles, and things that make them human. And then in the same sense, the antagonist or the villain, and I think needs to be also a person who is not just all bad and has a reason for, there's that old saying, every villain is a hero in their own story, right? And so the motivation has to be there in the understanding. And, in all of the things that I've written, like Amber Patterson in the Parish trilogy is a character, she's not likable, but you know exactly who she is, but she's brilliant. She is methodical, she knows what she wants, and she's not afraid to work hard to get it. And it's not somebody that I would ever want to be friends with, but it is somebody that people seem to like to read about. And it is a character too that when I have readers say to me, oh, I really identified with her, or a couple friends, I'm like, I'm gonna cut, cutting them off because she's not somebody you want to be your friend. But again, I feel like, the authenticity is the thing for me. When I'm reading a book, I want to see whatever's going to happen, I want the character to advance it. So I don't, and if I have an idea in my head of where a story's going to go and the character's developed to such a point where I realize, no, that person would never do it, I change the story, because I never want somebody to say, no, wait a minute. You presented this character here, and she would never do that. So I think that the one word I would use would be authenticity for me. That matters.
I think it's something of a lightning rod issue in our field as to whether the protagonist needs to be likable or somebody you can root for. And I see a lot of gender factors come into play here too. I think that often the male protagonist is not held to the same high standards as a female protagonist. And I really do rebel against the idea that my female protagonist has to be either likable or someone you can root for. I think generally most people find that they are, but I think it only matters that they're interesting. I think that if you look at Gone Girl, the two leads of that book, would you like to spend time with either of those people? I mean, nobody would. And yet their predicament, their situations, and their characters are so interesting that it makes for compelling reading. And I think that's what I strive for. And I think that, as others have said, what makes characters interesting is often the contradictions in them and their predicament, how they react to their predicament. And there's lots of ways to do that without having it be. Now, if you're writing a book that's a hero's journey kind of novel, then yeah, you need to be able to root for that guy or that girl. But in the mystery world, I think we have a lot more freedom to make our characters more shaded and lots of shades of gray in our characters and shading, and that I think is what makes them interesting.
I've been teaching college students for 19 years, and I feel like I've got a nice data set in terms of readership. I think anyone who's taught knows it's a lot of throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks, and you'll pick a book that you are sure students are going to love, and then they do not. And then there's a book you're a little reluctant to teach, and they really respond to it. And I think what I've learned over time is I feel like it's a perfect sort of balance of the recognizable and the inscrutable in a character. So the character has to be human enough that we can see a certain pattern of behavior that feels realistic, even if it is not our pattern of behavior. But then also the character has to make decisions that don't necessarily, that we don't predict that are going to happen. And I think when students talk about relatability or likability, I used to get kind of annoyed with that conversation because I feel like I seek out things I don't understand or don't know in books personally, but I think we've finally sort of parsed that it's partly looking for patterns of decision-making or emotional responses, intellectual responses that they can understand. So I taught Talented Mr. Ripley this semester in a crime fiction class, and I was surprised how well that went over when we sort of framed it as in terms of Highsmith commenting on the American dream, because that was an element that they were well versed in terms of the failures of that ideology. And so then even his most criminal behaviors sort of had a framework for them to understand it, and I think that helps.
I agree with pretty much everything that's already been said, so I'm going to maybe take a slightly different tack. So one of the things that I end up doing a lot is reading aspiring writers' manuscripts and commenting on them. And one of the mistakes that I see them make frequently is it'll be a really well-written story, usually a procedural kind of thing where there's a crime and the detective or sleuth shows up, and the people think that just because there's a body that there's necessarily tension. And the tension really does have to start with the character. And I think this is why you see a lot of cliche things with like, ooh, we're making it personal, where the detective knows the dead body, or, you know, their friend is accused, because that immediately heightens it. But you don't necessarily have to go that direction. But the character does have to have a stake in whatever's happening. It can't just be, oh, it's my job, so I'm here and I'm doing this. That's very flat. So you have to think about not just a detective showing up at the scene, but this particular detective. Like, how would they be at this scene? Like, maybe it was a scene of an arson and they're very afraid of fire, so like they're wary of being here, or something like that. But everything starts in character, even plot. And I think when you're starting a story, you really do have to start with the characters.
So in terms of likability, something that I realized after the reviews started coming in for Listen for the Lie is that I don't actually understand what makes characters likable, apparently, because I started reading the reviews and they said, no one in this book is likable. And these were good reviews. They loved the book, and they said, no one in this book is likable. I was like, no, like not even Grandma, like not even the hot podcaster Ben, no one. So I think I apparently don't worry about making characters likable because I don't know how to do it. I think the thing that I worked on a lot with Listen for the Lie is the relationship that the characters have to each other. So, you know, you may not like my main character, Lucy. She may be a murderer, but she's funny, and she has great relationships with her grandma, and she has a very strong relationship that you learn about in the second half of the book with her best friend, Savvy, who has died. And I think that is what sort of makes it relatable in a way, even if they don't like the character, because they see a relationship with their grandma or with another family member, or especially I hear a lot from women about the female friendship in Listen for the Lie and how it's portrayed and all its complexities. And so I think that is something that people like, even though they're writing a review that says no one's likable, it's a 5-star review because they still liked it.
Okay. From other writers' works, describe a character you like. In other words, someone who ain't your character.
Mine would probably be George Smiley from all the John le Carré books. I read them when I was 15 or 16, which seems very young to be reading those books, and I recall the time being like, man, there would be nothing better than to be sad and old in England. It would be great to have your heart broken and be so cynical and bruised moralist and all that stuff. I don't know why I thought that. I was probably a very weird child. But I recall him being just a terrific character because he is so quiet and watchful. I know that he was written as an anti-James Bond, where, you know, he's not in like a tuxedo. He's not cool and sexy. He's a short little fat guy with thick glasses whose wife is cheating on him a whole lot. But his comprehension of human character and his ability to intuit what makes people work and what they're likely to do is his superpower. He doesn't talk a great deal, and this gets harder as like the series goes on. In the second one, he is kind of in the background more because he's at the height of his powers, and just like a detective story, it's a lot more fun when you are on the outside of the character's thinking. You can't guess at their brilliance. You have to be led to it through the eyes of someone else. And that's kind of where he shines a bit. There are a few of his short stories that he's in later. There's one that I recall where a spy goes missing and he asks his friend, can you think of like a place that he might be? And the friend is saying, like, I'm not sure why you're here with me. And he's like, well, we did find some letters that he wrote to you that he had hidden in his apartment. And then a whole lot of story goes by, and then he goes, and like those letters, they are love letters, of course. And you're like, oh, that breaks open this whole like relationship, because the friend had no idea that this guy was in love with him. But Smiley knew it in a second. And that sort of quiet like wisdom is something that I think is so great on the page. And just for the record, I am more of a fan of the Alec Guinness version of Smiley than like the Gary Oldman, who's a little chillier, a little stronger, a little more threatening than I normally would have preferred.
So I'm going to go with Elizabeth Bennett from Pride and Prejudice. She's just such a strong character, someone who, especially in the time she was in, a woman who was assertive and witty and smart, but yet cared deeply about family and looking out for those that she cared about, and just everything that comes out of her mouth, I love.
In keeping with my theme of loving older women, I'm going to say Vera Stanhope from the Anne Cleves novels. Vera is, as I was saying earlier, a bundle of contradictions. She's short and fat like Smiley. She dresses like a fishwife. She has an appearance that obviously would make people underestimate her, but she's very shrewd. And she sees through things. And the other thing that she is so abusive to her team. If I worked for her, I would be running to HR every day. But then when you see her interact with witnesses and with, family members, she is tender, she is sympathetic, she's, really gets to the heart of the matter. So she just has this really, I think, great complex of contradictory factors that make her very interesting. And of course, the fact that she's, brilliant and solves crimes is always a plus.
So I'm going to interpret this one as characters from a writer other than the trio that I wrote about. And so I'm going to shout out Margaret Millar. We've had a couple of Ross MacDonald references today, Ross MacDonald, a.k.a. Kenneth Millar. So I'm going to shout out his wife, Margaret Millar, who is criminally underrated. And she has a number of unstable female protagonists that are often the sort of central consciousness of the book. And I think it's just a masterclass in the sort of psychological suspense that we see a lot of today. And again, many of her books are out of print, so I'm trying to put this out into the universe. If someone has some strings to pull, there you go.
I'm going to pick Britt Marie from Britt Marie Was Here by Frederick Bachman. I think she's fascinating and just interesting because she was a side character in an earlier book, and then she takes main stage. And in the earlier book, she was very unlikable and almost to the point of being an antagonist, and now she's the protagonist. So we have to somehow move her from being unlikable to being someone that you are empathetic with and understand. And so she's very closed off and grouchy at the beginning of the book, and by the end she's like serving the rat that lives with her like little crumbs and making sure he has enough to feed his rat family. And and the way that she does this is by saying yes to things that she wouldn't ordinarily have said yes to, and kind of being dragged into humanity through like the local kids soccer team. And it's really fascinating to see how Frederick Bachman does that, and you end up really liking somebody that you didn't really like at the beginning.
So I have to go with Amy from Gone Girl. I love Gone Girl. It's the book that really got me interested in writing mystery thrillers. But I think it goes back to the likability thing as well, because Amy is just completely unhinged, and she does things that I think most of us would never do in our own lives. But it is so fun to watch her like enact her vengeance and to go on her rants and to just be completely insane. And I think that's a big part of the reason that we like reading about unlikable characters is like maybe deep down we also want to get that guy back, and Amy did that for us.
Tell us about your all-time favorite villain and what this person's appeal is.
So this one I kind of struggle with a lot, and it took me a while. It took me some time to realize why. Because to me, if someone is a villain, then they're not necessarily a character. Once they, the way I settled on this is that I like when my villains aren't comprehensible, when they seem to suggest or pretend something that is beyond the normal human scope. If something is comprehensible within the human scope, then they're a character as opposed to a villain. And I don't know why my brain settled on that. That just said, like, I was sitting on the plane yesterday, like, man, I don't know what I'm going to say. I can't say, like, all these classic villains because they're just kind of classic villains. So as I started to kind of zero in on ones that aren't comprehensible, the first thing that I thought of were, like, all the David Lynch movies where there is, like, a man from some other place who comes in and is bizarre and incomprehensible. Like in Lost Highway, there's this scene where it's like, I'm in your house. I'm in your house right now. And he's like, what? And then, because it's in the 90s, this phone is the size of a brick. And he's like, call your house. And then he calls his house. And this guy in front of him, he answers. And he's like, see, I said I was in your house. And then he just smiles and leaves. It's the strangest thing in the world. But it's not fair to do a David Lynch movie because human characters aren't really a thing in a David Lynch movie. And so I settled on The Vanishing, which is a Dutch film from 1988 about a girl who goes missing at a gas station, if I recall. And her boyfriend goes nuts trying to find her, makes all these ads for trying to find who she is. He goes bankrupt. But all the time you know who did it, and it's this guy who's just kind of a quaint little old man. He's like a family man who has a wife and a job, and he's loved, and he loves to do the crossword. And it's not until the end of the movie that he like walks him and is like, I did it, and if you want to see what happened to her, I can show you. And then he explains that the reason why he did it was he saved a girl from drowning. And he got such admiration for it, but he knew that he had no conscience. And he was like, so I decided that the only way to prove that I was a good person would be to put myself in a position where I could do great evil. And that's what I did with her. But then I went ahead and did the great evil, and I had a great time doing it. And that's what I'm going to do to you now. And it's this oddly chilling thing where you comprehend that this guy's brain is not something you can understand. There's something inside of him that makes him completely different that's just tremendously upsetting. And I think that that's kind of how it feels to be close to real evil. Like we see it in the news where someone, we kind of see in the news a lot, where someone has done something that is going to kill thousands, if not like millions of people, and is just living their life. And now I'm going to go have a sandwich. That's the strangest thing about being a human being to me.
So thinking about this, I came to Joe Goldberg in You and Carolyn Kempnis's books. And what I like about Joe is that you know what he's doing is wrong, but he quickly gets you on his side because, again, it's that rationalization. And in his mind, you know, he's really just pursuing who he loves, and he's doing these things. And, you know, it starts off, you know, in the first book where she's going to be happy about it, and it's okay that he has to invade her privacy and do all of these things in service of what is going to be this great love affair. So, and he's funny, and he also has, you know, he helps. There's a neighbor who kind of is not parented, you know, all the time, and so he's very helpful to that. So he's got a lot of different sort of levels to his morality where, you know, there's certain lines that he wouldn't cross. So he's not somebody that's just going to murder you, you know, on a street corner somewhere, but he's very deliberate about what he does. And he's interesting, funny, and he's likable, and it's kind of like you're reading and then watching it as he's come to life on the screen, and thinking, how is it that I'm, rooting for this guy when really I shouldn't be.
When it comes to villains, I really don't like villains who are just pure evil, who are just doing evil for evil's sake. I like to believe there's no such thing in real life. I don't know if that's true, but I like to believe it. But I do think that it's not interesting when the villain is just somebody who does evil for evil's sake and is just pure evil. As Liv said earlier, they're the hero of their own story, and I think that an interesting villain is one that has a story and has a fully fleshed personality. My favorite villain is probably not strictly speaking a villain, but rather an antagonist to the protagonist, and that's Diana Taverner from the Slow Horses novels by Mick Herron. Again, an older woman, I've got a thing. What I like about her is that everything she does is designed to either protect her position or advance her position. It's pure ambition and power, and coming from a law firm world, I saw a lot of that. I know a lot of people who are motivated by nothing more than that. And it makes her, she's diabolical. I mean, she is planning things that hurt other people, there's no question. She has sacrificed lives along the way in order to accomplish what she sees as her goal. Now, she will rationalize it like Joe by saying this is for the security of our nation. We're doing this, we're sacrificing this team for that, whatever. In the end, she's not a likable person at all, but I do admire her.
I'm going to say all of Patricia Highsmith's female characters. I could have picked Highsmith herself, but I'm going to pick the female characters. Hashtag justice for Melinda in Deepwater, Marge in Talented Miss Ripley, Guy's first wife in Strangers on a Train, who I'm blanking on her name right now. But I think one of the reasons I like them so much is because Highsmith has these famous protagonists who are complex criminals themselves often, and the women in their lives might be the instigator of some of their criminal behavior, but they can always stand toe-to-toe with them, and I think they've been misread a lot in interpretations of her work. They're sort of depicted as flat side characters, but I think if you try to see from their perspective, if you get outside of the perspective of the main character, you can see these are women who are trying to sort of grapple with finding autonomy in a post-war world that wasn't really looking to make a space for women. And yeah, they go about it in some bad ways, but they usually don't kill people, unlike most of her heroes. So I just think there's a lot left to be done with those female characters. And she has actually in her short fiction a lot of female protagonists too. And I'm hoping that more people will look at those characters in her work.
Today, I'm going to pick Annie Wilkes from Stephen King's Misery. And I think she's fascinating kind of as a Stephen King particular nightmare, maybe for himself, about holding the writer prisoner. And, maybe she represents fans and the publishing industry. I'm not sure. But she, readers can really empathize with a lot of what she wants, right? Like, you've been reading a long-running series, you feel like you know these people, they're your friends, and then all of a sudden the writer's like, nope, no more, your friends are gone. And, the desire to see more of these people and have them brought to life again, you can sort of get behind that. And, she takes further and further steps and goes to more extremes to make it happen. And watching that kind of revelation of her madness is really great. And then now as a writer, with one series that's over and another that's ending, I sometimes get the emails from people who maybe sound a little unhinged about, I don't really worry I'm going to end up tied to a bed, but you never know.
I started my career in young adult sci-fi fantasy, so I'm going to show my YA roots a little bit here and say that my favorite villain is Spike from the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I've loved Spike, since the 90s when I first started watching it, but I really love a hot, funny villain who has chemistry with the main character. I just think that is so fun, even if it's a little bit wrong. But I think Spike, especially in the Buffy universe, the vampires don't have a soul. But the thing that you learn about Spike like right away is that he is deeply in love with his partner Drusilla. Like that is his main motivation for everything in life. So this man doesn't have a soul, but he still loves this woman so much, and I always found that so interesting. And I think that is sort of encompasses all my favorite villains. Is they have very strong emotions. Sometimes it's love or obsession or something like that. But like they were saying, it's not just evil for evil's sake.
A point of personal privilege, Jay Gatsby. Now, okay, he's a crook, right? But, you know, he's so much better than all the rest of them. Let's face it. Okay, so let's see, we have 10 minutes. How about we turn it over to questions? Sir.
Well, can I ask the panel who are writing a series to talk about the effect of a character arc across a multi-book series, how they address that with their characters?
Anybody? Jump in.
Sure, I can start. So I have two. One was a planned series where I knew, like I had in my head 5 books when I started, so I knew where I wanted to move the character from. And that's my first series. The character's name is Ellery Hathaway, and she is loosely inspired by a real life person from the Ted Bundy story. Carol Durant, and Carol was 18 and shopping at a mall when Ted Bundy, posing as a police officer, abducted her. And she was able to get away from him and became his first known living victim. So that's great and all, but Carol today still gets 15 messages about Bundy. He's been dead since 1989. So she escaped, but she didn't. Because everybody's public fascination with the story means she's like, that's the only thing anybody ever wants to know about her. So you're 18, your whole life is impacted. You look like you're going to die, but then you live, but then there's this, horrible creature that follows you around for the rest of your life. How do you figure out who you are in the wake of that terrible thing happening to you? How do you separate his narrative from yours when that's the only thing anybody ever wants to know? And figuring out how to do that and to reclaim her own identity is my character's journey, and it takes her 5 books, and in the 5th book, the killer that she escaped from asks to see her again. So that's kind of the culmination where the series was always heading, because it happened to her when she was a kid, kind of like Carol. She was a teenager, and now she's an adult, she's in law enforcement, she's gonna go see him on her own terms, or is she? And they have that kind of final head-to-head. But like moving her along that trajectory is one sort of, each book she learns something new until at the end she finally comes into her own.
Anybody
The other
else?
one wasn't planned, and I'm kind of been pantsing that.
I feel like a bit of this has to go back to the questions that are being asked by the series. Like each good book asks questions and looks at it and tries to find something like an answer, though if it's a perfect answer, you didn't write a book, you're trying to preach on the street. But for example, like in the Tainted Cup in the first one, there's a lot of questions about what is the empire? What is it like to work for the state? Is the state, what makes a state strong and what makes it weak? But for the second one, since we're trying to talk about series. For a lot of it, so Din, like in the first one, it is Din's job to try and solve these crimes, to solve murders. But he doesn't find this very fulfilling, and this is because, and I stole this 100% from Foyle's War, which is a terrific TV show, where there is a war that is happening. I want to be there on the front lines and actually serve my country. I don't really want to be here trying to solve crimes like these because I don't really ever fix anything. I can't bring these people back to life. This always ends in bars or a rope, and that's it. And I don't feel like I'm making our nation that much better. And of course, he's led to comprehend that they might defend our country, but we keep a country worth defending, because we have to keep things fair and equitable, and make sure that those who have been wronged see justice. Because if we don't do that, we can't keep fighting the war, because then things fall apart to corruption, to resentment, and there's no idea of a cohesive like society that can maintain force across this amount of distance. So it's kind of like it is the right answer in the wrong way, and that's my favorite kind of answer. It's like, I'm not doing this for the right reason, I'm doing this because it's the smart reason. But seeing Din sort of like bend toward that, as well as like realizing we're never gonna fix it all. Like our job is to manage like our corruption as a species, but we're never gonna get rid of it. It'll always be here. We just have to make sure that it's in check.
Okay, good. Another question. In the back.
Yes, I was the one who opened that hornet's nest. And I think that female authors among us have probably heard this from their editors, their agents, their readers. You know, she's not likable enough. You have to make her more likable. You have to give her, give her a best friend that she can, bounce off of, so that we see that the best friend likes her, therefore she must be likable. Or give her children and make her nurturing and as I mentioned, I do rebel against that idea. Because it shouldn't matter if she's interesting. But I do find that, now I did hear, anybody knows the writer Alan Drew, who wrote a couple good books, including The Recruit, and he said that his editor was always telling him, you need to make your male protagonist more likable. And I was shocked to hear that, because I didn't think it ever worked in that direction. But I think that we don't see it. I think that most people accept the hard-boiled originator of our sort of genre was never a likable guy, and people admired him. He was tough, and he called women dames, and he's that kind of model. I think there's still a thread of that persists today with male protagonists, which is that they don't need to be good guys in the traditional sense. They don't need to be somebody that you like, and they often have terrible backstories, and they're alcoholics, and they're have PTSD, but they're interesting, and therefore I think the readers are happy and accept them. And I would like to see, and they don't have to have cats. I would like to see the same thing happen with women.
Okay. One other answer, and then we'll have to wrap it.
I do think, though, that with Gone Girl sort of broke that mold a bit, and that, then you had Girl on the Train, and it did open it up. I mean, almost to the point where, like, I don't even know, is women's fiction still a genre? It shouldn't be, right? I mean, it should just be fiction, and I think we've sort of moved to that. So I think we're definitely getting there, but, it's a journey.
Okay. This has been great, Vi. So. Good job, guys.